Hello, everybody. What is up, and welcome back. If you're new here, I am Liz, your host here at Crimes Untold. My podcast, my YouTube channel, all of the above. Today is a fun day. You want to know why? Oh, I'll tell you why. We are going to be talking about one of the most prolific and notorious serial killers that remains unidentified, that has carried the pseudonym of the Zodiac Killer, or Zodiac, who terrified Northern California in the 1960s. So this killer has yet to be identified. I'll kind of talk about what has happened in the last few years when it comes to the whole DNA thing and what people think, yada, yada, yada. I'll also be talking about some other crimes that may be associated with the Zodiac Killer, but they're possible, not confirmed. Plus all the confirmed victims, kind of what happened in between victims, the letters, all of the above. Yes. So this serial killer has gone unidentified for this, as of this year, it's 55 years. So 55 years since in December, on December 20th to be exact. That's the day of the first crime that took place in 1968. But December 20th, 2023, it will mark 55 years that this serial killer has been unidentified. And this whole crime spree has been unsolved. Mind-blowing. So he's primarily known for his notoriety of using codes and cryptics and ciphers when sending correspondence to the police and media. With this, it was like a public display of bragging, basically. To me, he seems like he's a narcissistic killer that can switch from a detached method of killing, which is using a gun, to something that's super up close and personal, like using a knife to kill someone. He's kind of like an all over the place serial killer. Throughout correspondence with Zodiac, we'll just say they claimed that they killed a total of 37, but with the investigation into the case, 7 confirmed victims, 2 survived, 5 died, but we also have some possibilities. So let's just jump right into our first murder scene, shall we? So our first crime scene is at Lake Herman. This was on December 20th of 1968. This included Betty Lou Jensen, who was 16, and David Faraday, who was 17. And they were actually out on their first date, which is really cute, but it's really sad at the same time because it was her first date. She has never gone on a date with a man ever, or anybody ever. And David was really excited to take Betty Lou out on a date. So their initial plans were to attend some sources say it's a Christmas concert, some say it's a Christmas pageant, but this was at Hogan High School, and they wanted to do this prior to going to a local restaurant where they wanted to stop by and just say hi to a friend, but these plans changed, and they somehow ended up in an area that is a lover's lane, which is Lake Herman Road, and this was at about 10:15 p.m. So at around 11 p.m., a neighbor, Stella Borges, if you see her last name, it's Borges. It kind of looks like Borges or Borge, dependent on however you pronounce it. I'm going to butcher it. So Stella, who lived near, ended up seeing the bodies of Betty Lou and David, and she would end up informing the police. And then the Solano County Sheriff's Department would investigate the crime scene. So they would determine that whomever killed David and Betty Lou, they pulled into the turnaround just before 11 p.m., which is like the turnaround near where the car was. So they pulled into the turnaround. They would park their vehicle right next to the Rambler that is actually David's mom's car. Park right next to the car David was driving. The killer then got out of his car, walked up next to the Rambler, and it's speculated that this killer ordered the couple to get out of the car, and Betty Lou was first to get out, and then while David was halfway out of the car, this is when the killer shot him in the head. This, obviously, for anybody, would cause a panic, and Betty Lou would try and run off. The killer then turned around and shot her in the back while she was trying to run away. She was hit 5 times in the back, and her body was approximately about 28 feet away from the Rambler, or the car. So with this, the killer felt accomplished and, just left. Left them there. This crime scene, if you look at, there's some websites where there's actually part of the, a crime scene report, and it says that the crime scene is at the entrance of the Benicia water pumping station at Lake Herman, and they were parked in a gravel parking lot. It was determined that David died due to the shot in the head at point blank range, and it would be only minutes that he had from the shot to him dying. I really hope he didn't feel any pain when he died, because it sounds like a horrific way to die, especially on your first date with somebody that you really like. Come on. Betty Lou was killed instantly from the 5 shots in her back when she was running away after seeing David shot, like I had previously mentioned. It was determined that they were killed with a Super X copper-coated .22 semi-automatic Winchester long rifle. There was no witnesses, no indication of robbery, and no indication of sexual assault. It's really, really sad. Especially where it's something that you're not... For the general public, this is obviously not something that would happen. It's the 60s. It's 1968. It's... Everybody loves each other. Everybody's hippies. Everybody's happy. You don't expect this. Obviously, Charles Manson is a happening. The 60s and the 70s and I would say kind of the 80s, but the 60s and 70s were pretty rampant for serial killers, and the term serial killer wasn't even a thing yet. It was just a killer. If there was a string of killings that were related, it was just like serial murders. Serial killer was not coined yet, and this was not something that you would expect. Certainly, David and Betty Lou's family, this is not something they would expect either. They were completely shocked, as was the community. And it just is, it's something that will forever haunt their minds. The residents in this area, it will haunt their minds, because it's not having such a tragic death like this, not something you're used to seeing in the media, seeing anywhere. As will be the same basically for the rest of our victims that we will be discussing. So we're going to go straight into our next victim, or our next murder, which this is the Blue Rock Springs murder. So around midnight on the 4th of July of 1969, this is when 18-year-old Darlene Ferrin and 19-year-old Michael Magu drove and parked in Vallejo at a parking lot in the Blue Rock Springs Park. So when they were there, or when they were parked in Darlene's car, a second car came up alongside it, kind of hindered, but then drove away. It was super strange. But about 10 minutes later, the car returned and parked behind Darlene's car. This is when the driver got out of the car and approached the passenger door of the vehicle. And when the driver came up to the door, he was carrying a flashlight. But what you couldn't notice at first probably is that he was also carrying a 9mm Luger with it at the same time, basically holding a flashlight with a gun, basically brandishing it in Darlene and Michael's faces. And this was right before he shot 5 rounds into the vehicle. Both Michael and Darlene were hit, and the killer just simply walked back to the car, but I'm assuming didn't know whether or not the victims were dead or not, and shot them both 2 more times. So he shot into the car 5 times, started walking away, and was just went back, 2 more rounds fired into them, and then got back into his vehicle and drove away. So just about 40 minutes after this shooting, at 12:40 a.m. on July 5th, 1969, this is when a man would call the Vallejo PD, reporting that he's the one responsible for this attack. and the murder at Lake Herman just 6 months prior to this attack. This call was placed on a gas station phone booth at the Springs Road Tulum. Yeah. That was within blocks of Darlene's home and the Vallejo PD. This dude was literally cutting it super, super close to where he was. Like, I don't know. Like, this is another reason why I think he's a narcissistic thrill killer, is because he's literally within blocks of where Darlene lived and where the Vallejo PD is. And he's calling from a payphone. Like, how much more of a thrill does this dude need to have to be in such close vicinity to everybody? So he was also able to identify the murder weapon, which was a semi-automatic 9mm Luger. Darlene would end up being taken to the hospital, in which she would be pronounced dead from all 9 gunshot wounds. But Michael, on the other hand, somehow survived being shot in the face, neck, and chest. I don't know. It's mind-blowing. And he would make a full recovery from these injuries that he ended up surviving from. And it's thankful that he survived, because the police were able to talk to Michael about what the killer might look like and get a first-hand look into who this killer is, whoever is responsible for these attacks. And for the one that happened just 6 months prior to this one. So Michael would say that the killer was between 26 to 30, about 200 pounds, or he could have weighed more because he was kind of like a huskier, stockier build. About 5'8" in height, and he was Caucasian with shorter, curly, light brown hair. So just such an average Joe for such a diabolical killer, right? Michael also was able to establish that the car the killer was driving looked just like Darlene's car. And the killer drove a car that it could have been a light brown Chevrolet Cover, or it could have been a light brown Ford Mustang, because it was a sportier type of a car that looked just like Darlene's car, which was a Cover. But I also want you to know is that Darlene was married, and she also had a baby. And Michael was not her husband. And she was actually, some correspondents say that she wanted to leave her husband to be with Michael. Her child was at home with her husband. And their relationship kind of turns up some questions when it came to this case as well. Because some people thought it was Michael that actually committed these crimes, or it could have been Dean, her husband. So some people believe it was Dean, but Dean was at home with their child, their young child. And the police even looked into him because, like any case with a dead wife and a lover being found, they're going to look into a spouse or a husband when it comes to motive and stuff like this. But Dean was cleared from this crime due to eyewitness testimony that Michael Magu gave, because Dean doesn't fit the description as well. Like, he doesn't fit it at all. So on July 31st of 1969, so just a few weeks later, letters would be sent to the Examiner, the Chronicle, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. And these letters would depict something that would forever be associated with this person. The letters are depicted to be written by the killer, and the killer would release details that only they would know when it comes to both of these murder scenes. And each of these letters included a cipher, about a third of a cipher that when all parts are put together, they would contain the killer's identity. This set of letters would mark the beginning of a little more than a 5-year spree in which we would find out he would call himself Zodiac, or the Zodiac Killer. This is when his name kind of comes out and everybody knows that he's the Zodiac Killer. So that, my friends, is part 1 of the Zodiac Killer. This is going to be multiple parts because it is a massive unsolved and unidentified case, and you're welcome for the change shirt. But I'll see you guys in the next one.